Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, October 12, 1943. Lorraine Hartley woke at 4 in the morning to the rhythmic clatter of train wheels beneath her sleeper car. The voice of her mother echoed in her mind as if she had spoken the words aloud. "Do not go to him." Lorraine opened her eyes in the darkness and listened to the steady percussion of steel on steel. Something was wrong with the man who had sat across from her yesterday evening, describing his apartment on Beacon Hill in Boston. Something she could not name but could feel in the pit of her stomach like a stone. 3 weeks earlier, on September 21, 1943, 26-year-old Lorraine Hartley stood on the platform at Union Station in Pittsburgh, waiting for the express to Boston. She was traveling to attend an advanced cosmetology training program sponsored by the War Production Board. With so many men overseas fighting in Europe and the Pacific, the civilian workforce had expanded dramatically, and the government was investing in professional development for women in essential services. Lorraine worked at Marcella's Beauty Parlor on Liberty Avenue, where she had been employed since she was 19 years old. She was considered one of the finest hairdressers in the city. Appointments had to be made 2 weeks in advance, especially before holidays and bond drive galas, when the women of Pittsburgh wanted to look their absolute best. The train arrived 40 minutes late due to military transport taking priority on the rails. Lorraine found her assigned berth in the sleeping car, lower bunk, compartment 7. A man was already seated across from her. He appeared to be about 33 years old. He wore wire-rimmed spectacles and had a neat beard that was unusual for the time when most men were clean-shaven. His suit was light tan wool of good quality. He was reading a technical manual in what appeared to be German. Lorraine stowed her valise and sat down with a copy of Ladies' Home Journal that featured an article about victory gardens and wartime nutrition. "Good evening," the man said, looking up from his book. "Name is Fletcher Cosgrove. Pleased to meet you." His voice was soft and cultivated with a faint New England inflection that suggested education and refinement. Lorraine introduced herself. They began to talk. Fletcher explained that he worked as a design engineer at a defense contractor in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He had been on assignment in Pittsburgh consulting with Westinghouse Electric on automated assembly systems for artillery shell production. The work was critical to the war effort, he explained. Every shell had to be manufactured to exact specifications. A single defect could cause a misfire and endanger American soldiers. He spoke unhurriedly with technical precision, mentioning engineering concepts Lorraine did not understand, but which sounded convincing and important. "What do you do?" he asked with genuine interest in his eyes. "I am a hairdresser," Lorraine answered, "traveling to Boston for advanced training." "Marvelous profession," Fletcher nodded. "Very creative. You must be quite talented. You have beautiful hands, well cared for. One can tell immediately that you are a master of your craft." Lorraine felt herself flush slightly. She received compliments regularly from clients and colleagues, and occasionally from men on the street, but this one felt different. Fletcher spoke seriously without flirtation, as if stating an observable fact, the way one might comment on the weather or the quality of a painting. They talked until midnight. Fletcher described Boston and his work, and the intensity of wartime manufacturing. He told her about the blackout drills and the air raid wardens, and the sense of purpose that permeated the city. Everyone was doing their part, he said. Even the smallest contribution mattered. Lorraine listened and occasionally shared stories about Pittsburgh and her salon and her clients. She told him about Mrs. Henderson, who came in every Friday for a wash and set, and always brought cookies she had baked with, her ration sugar. She told him about the young brides who came in before their weddings to soldiers shipping out to Europe. She told him about the quiet sadness that had settled over the city as more and more gold stars appeared in windows, signaling the loss of sons and husbands and brothers. Fletcher listened attentively. He asked thoughtful questions. He seemed genuinely interested in her life. Lorraine was impressed. Fletcher was unlike the men she knew in Pittsburgh. He did not drink heavily or use coarse language or immediately try to arrange some inappropriate meeting. He was courteous, educated, and calm. When the porter announced that it was time to retire, Fletcher politely wished her good night and turned toward the wall of the compartment. Lorraine lay on her bunk and pulled up the blanket, but could not sleep for a long time. She felt that something important had occurred, though she could not identify what. She replayed their conversation in her mind. She thought about the way he had looked at her when she spoke. She thought about the warmth in his voice. She thought about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had met someone special. The next morning, September 22nd, they spoke again over breakfast in the dining car. Fletcher purchased 2 cups of coffee and brought one to Lorraine along with a Danish pastry. He asked where she would be staying in Boston. Lorraine told him she had been assigned a room at a women's boarding house in the South End run by the training program. It was a converted townhouse that housed 8 women at a time. Fletcher frowned. "That is quite far from the center of the city," he said, "and those boarding houses can be rather grim." "I have an idea. I happen to have tomorrow off. I could show you Boston if you would like. The Common, Faneuil Hall, the Old North Church. This is your first time in Boston, is it not?" "Not my first time," Lorraine replied, "but it has been years. I came with my parents when I was a child. I remember almost nothing except the swan boats in the public garden." "Then, I absolutely must show you the city," Fletcher said with a warm smile. "Give me the address of your boarding house. I will collect you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Lorraine hesitated for only a moment before deciding there was no harm in it. He seemed like a respectable gentleman, the kind of man her father would have approved of. She wrote the address on a slip of paper and handed it to him. The following day, September 23rd, Fletcher arrived at the boarding house precisely at 10 o'clock, as promised. He wore the same tan suit, but with a necktie and a fedora. They walked through Boston until evening. Fletcher showed her the city with the enthusiasm of someone who loved where he lived. They visited the Common and watched children playing despite the war. They walked through the Granary Burying Ground, where Paul Revere and Samuel Adams were buried. They had lunch at Durgan Park, where they ate clam chowder and brown bread. Fletcher told her stories about the Revolutionary War and the old buildings. He showed her the State House with its golden dome. He pointed out the narrowest house in Boston on Beacon Hill. He took her to the Old North Church where the lanterns had been hung to warn of the British advance. Lorraine felt as though she were living in a dream. No one had ever treated her with such attentiveness. No one had ever made her feel so interesting and valued. That evening, Fletcher walked her back to the boarding house. At the door, he said, "Lorraine, I have had a wonderful time with you. May I see you again? I will telephone tomorrow and we can arrange another outing." She nodded, unable to speak. He took her hand and kissed it in an old-fashioned gesture that made her heart race, and then walked away into the dusk. The training program lasted 2 weeks and covered the latest techniques in permanent waving hair coloring and precision cutting. The instructor was a stern woman named Mrs. Caldwell, who had trained in New York and Paris before the war. She emphasized that beauty work was not frivolous during wartime. It was essential to morale. Women needed to feel attractive and confident whether their husbands were overseas or working double shifts in factories. A good hairdresser, she said, was performing a patriotic service. Fletcher telephoned every day at the boarding house to ask how her coursework was progressing. He visited in the evenings and sometimes met her after class. They walked through the city together. They sat in coffee shops and talked for hours. Fletcher told her about his childhood in Vermont. His father had been a professor of mathematics at Middlebury College. His mother had died when he was young. He had been a serious student and had graduated from MIT with honors. He had started working in defense contracting when the war began. He felt it was his duty, he said, even though he could not serve in the military due to poor eyesight. Lorraine told him about her life in Pittsburgh. Her father had owned a small hardware store. He had been a quiet man who loved to read and work with his hands. He had died of a heart attack 5 years earlier when Lorraine was 21. Her mother Edith had been devastated but had remained strong. She had raised Lorraine to be independent and capable. Lorraine had never attended college. Money had been tight after her father died, but she had found her calling in beauty work. She loved making women feel beautiful. She loved the transformation that occurred when someone sat in her chair looking tired and worried, and left looking refreshed and confident. Fletcher listened to all of this with deep attention. He asked about her dreams. Did she want to own her own salon someday? Did she want to train other hairdressers? Did she want to expand beyond Pittsburgh? Lorraine had never articulated these thoughts before, but as she spoke to Fletcher, she realized that, yes, she did have ambitions. She wanted to be more than just an employee. She wanted to build something of her own. Fletcher nodded approvingly. Ambition is important, he said, especially for women. The world is changing. After the war, women will not go back to the way things were before. You should prepare for that. On the 10th day, October 2nd, 1943, Fletcher invited her to dinner at Locke-Ober, one of the finest restaurants in Boston. They sat at a corner table draped with white linen and ate oysters Rockefeller and filet mignon and drank champagne. The meal was expensive, far more than Lorraine would have spent on herself, but Fletcher insisted. He wanted to celebrate, he said, though he did not specify what they were celebrating. Fletcher seemed preoccupied during the meal. He ate slowly and gazed out the window at the street where people hurried past in the October darkness. Finally, he took Lorraine's hand across the table and spoke. I want to make a proposal to you, he said. A serious one. I want you to marry me. Lorraine could not speak. She had not expected this. They had known each other only 2 weeks. But her heart was pounding, and she realized that she wanted to say yes. She had fallen in love with this man. He was everything she had hoped to find. Intelligent, refined, dependable, kind. Fletcher, this is so sudden, she managed. I understand, he said, but I am certain. I have met many women, Lorraine, shallow, frivolous women who care only about parties and gossip. But you are different. You are serious, hardworking, kind. You have depth and substance, exactly the sort of wife I have been searching for. I want to build a family, a proper, stable family. I have an apartment in Boston, 2 bedrooms on Beacon Hill, a good salary. We will live well. I will take care of you. You will never have to worry about money or security. Lorraine was silent. Her mind raced. She truly loved him. But everything was happening so quickly. She thought about her mother. What would Edith say? She thought about her life in Pittsburgh. Could she leave it all behind? Think about it, Fletcher said. Take your time. But I should tell you that I am 33 years old. I want children. I do not want to wait. If you say yes, we will need to formalize everything quickly. I can come to Pittsburgh to meet your mother. We can apply for a marriage license. In 3 months, you can move to Boston. We can start our life together. What about my job? Lorraine asked. You will find work here, Fletcher replied. Boston has beauty parlors everywhere. With your experience and training, you can work anywhere you choose. The pay will be higher than in Pittsburgh. You will have more opportunities. But there is one thing. He paused and looked away as if embarrassed. What is it? Lorraine asked anxiously. There is one problem, he said with a sigh. My apartment is 2 bedrooms, but it is small, 800 square feet. Too small for a family with children. I've been trying to exchange it for a 3-bedroom place. I could trade up if I had some additional capital, but I have no savings. Everything went into furnishings and repairs after I bought it last year. If you had the ability to contribute some funds, perhaps by selling property in Pittsburgh, we could make the exchange immediately. Then, when you move here, everything will be ready. We will have space for children. Space for your mother if she wants to visit. Lorraine thought carefully. She owned a 2-bedroom house on the north side that had belonged to her father. Her father had died 5 years earlier in 1938 from a heart attack. The house had been left to Lorraine and her mother in equal shares. Her mother still lived there with Lorraine. The house was worth approximately $4,000 according to recent appraisals. I could sell the house, Lorraine said slowly. Half of it is mine and half belongs to my mother. But my mother would have nowhere to live. Your mother will come with us, Fletcher said quickly. To Boston. We will trade my apartment for a 3-bedroom place and use your money to make up the difference. The 3 of us will live together. Your mother will be happy. The medical care in Boston is superior to Pittsburgh. The shops are better stocked, even with rationing. She will like it here. And she will be close to you. She will be able to help when the children come. Lorraine imagined the scenario. Boston. A 3-bedroom apartment. Fletcher. A new life. Her mother nearby. Children playing in the common. A future full of possibility. I need to think about it, she said. Of course, Fletcher replied. Take all the time you need. But remember that housing is difficult to find right now with the war. If an opportunity comes up for a good 3-bedroom apartment, we may need to act quickly. That evening, October 6, 1943, Lorraine returned to Pittsburgh. The train pulled into Union Station at dusk. She came through the front door of the house and embraced her mother, 56-year-old Edith Hartley, and sat down at the kitchen table. Her mother put the kettle on and brought out a loaf of bread and some butter. Lorraine told her everything. About Fletcher, about the proposal, about Boston, about selling the house. Edith listened in silence. Her face darkened gradually as the story unfolded. When Lorraine finished, her mother sat quietly for a long time, staring out the window at the street where children were playing stickball in the fading light. Then she spoke. No. What do you mean, no? Lorraine asked, confused. You are not going anywhere, Edith said firmly, and we are not selling this house. That man is a con artist. I can feel it in my bones. Mother, what are you talking about? Lorraine protested. He is an engineer. He works for a defense contractor. He has an apartment in Boston. He has a good job. He is educated and kind. Those are just stories, Edith said sharply. You've known him 2 weeks and he wants to marry you. And immediately he wants you to sell the house. This is a scheme, Lorraine, as old as time itself. Men like him find women who are lonely or vulnerable. They promise marriage and security. They extract money. And then they vanish. I have heard dozens of stories like this. My friend Clara from church, her niece was taken in by a man just like this. He said he was a banker. He said he had a house in Philadelphia. He convinced her to sell her mother's jewelry. Then he disappeared. She never saw him again. She never got her money back. You just do not want me to be happy, Lorraine shouted, standing up from the table. You are jealous. You want me to stay here forever and take care of you and never have a life of my own. Edith's face hardened. You are being foolish, she said calmly. You have fallen in love and lost your common sense. Listen to me, Lorraine. I am your mother. I have lived in this world for 56 years. I know how it works. I do not wish you harm. I want you to be happy. But I also want you to be safe. If Fletcher is genuine, he can wait. He can come here and meet us properly. He can court you for 6 months. He can prove himself. Then you can marry. But if he is rushing you, if he is pressuring you to sell property before you are even engaged, then something is wrong. I love him, Lorraine said, and tears were streaming down her face. Then test him, Edith replied. Tell him you need time. Tell him you want him to visit Pittsburgh. Tell him you want a proper engagement period. If he truly loves you, he will agree. If he refuses or makes excuses, then you will know the truth. Lorraine sat back down at the table, crying. Her mother stood and put her arms around her. I know it hurts, Edith whispered. I know you want this to be real. But I am trying to protect you. Trust me. The next day, October 7th, Lorraine went to work at the salon. She was distracted and made several small mistakes with clients' hair. She cut Mrs. Peterson's bangs too short. She used the wrong shade of dye on Miss Riley and had to correct it. At lunch, she walked to the public telephone booth on the corner of Liberty and 10th and called Fletcher's number in Boston. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hello, Fletcher, Lorraine said. It is me, Lorraine. His voice brightened immediately. I am so glad you called. Have you thought about my proposal? I have, Lorraine said, and I want to say yes, but my mother is concerned. She wants to meet you first. She wants you to come to Pittsburgh. There was a pause on the line. Then Fletcher spoke, and his voice had changed slightly. It was cooler, less warm. Lorraine, I told you I do not have time for a long courtship, he said. I am 33. I want to start a family. If we wait 6 months a year, we are wasting precious time. I am not getting any younger. I am not asking for a year, Lorraine said. Just come for a weekend. Meet my mother. Then we can proceed. Another pause, longer this time. I am very busy with work, Fletcher said. The war effort. We are under enormous pressure to meet production quotas. I cannot simply take time off for social visits. It is not a social visit, Lorraine replied, feeling a coldness spreading in her chest. It is meeting your future mother-in-law. I will try to arrange something, Fletcher said, but I cannot promise when. Perhaps in a few weeks. In the meantime, we should move forward with the practical arrangements. You should begin the process of selling the house, get an appraisal, contact a real estate agent. That way, when I do visit, everything will be ready. We can finalize the marriage plans and you can move to Boston by Christmas. Lorraine felt her stomach tighten. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. If he is rushing you, something is wrong. Fletcher, I need you to visit before we sell the house, she said firmly. There was a long silence. Then Fletcher's voice came back clipped and irritated. Fine, he said. I will come next weekend, October 16th. But we need to finalize things quickly after that. I do not have unlimited patience, Lorraine. There are other women who would jump at the opportunity I am offering you. The words stung. Lorraine felt tears forming in her eyes. Thank you, Lorraine said quietly. I will see you then. She hung up the telephone and stood in the booth feeling shaken. Something in his tone had frightened her. The warmth had vanished. He had sounded cold, calculating, almost threatening. That evening, she told her mother about the conversation. Edith listened and nodded. Good, she said. Now we will see what kind of man he really is. October 16th arrived. Lorraine cleaned the house thoroughly. She scrubbed the floors and washed the windows and polished the furniture. She baked a ham and made scalloped potatoes and green beans using precious ration coupons. She set the table with her mother's good china, the blue willow pattern that had been a wedding gift to her parents. At 6 o'clock in the evening, there was a knock at the door. Lorraine opened it. Fletcher stood on the porch. He was wearing the same tan suit. He looked tired and somewhat annoyed. His expression was tight. Hello, Lorraine, he said. May I come in? Of course, Lorraine said, stepping aside. Fletcher entered. He did not kiss her or embrace her. He simply walked past her into the living room. Edith came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. You must be Mrs. Hartley, Fletcher said, extending his hand perfunctorily. Fletcher Cosgrove. A pleasure to meet you. Edith shook his hand briefly and studied his face with the careful attention of someone examining a piece of fruit for rot. Mr. Cosgrove, she said, please sit down. Dinner will be ready shortly. They sat in the living room. The conversation was strained. Fletcher answered Edith's questions about his work and his family with short, clipped responses. He seemed uncomfortable. He kept looking at his watch. Lorraine felt the tension in the room like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. During dinner, Edith asked more pointed questions. Where exactly is your apartment, Mr. Cosgrove? She asked. Beacon Hill, Fletcher replied curtly. Mount Vernon Street. That is a very expensive neighborhood, Edith observed. How did you afford an apartment there on an engineer's salary? Fletcher's jaw tightened. He set down his fork with a sharp clink against the plate. I saved carefully, he said, and I received an inheritance from an uncle several years ago. I see, Edith said. And this uncle's name? Fletcher stared at her. Mrs. Hartley, I do not appreciate being interrogated like a criminal, he said coldly. I came here as a courtesy to Lorraine. I expected a warmer reception. I expected gratitude that a man of my standing and prospects would propose to your daughter. I am simply trying to understand who my daughter is planning to marry, Edith replied evenly. That seems reasonable to me. Any mother would want to know these things. Fletcher stood abruptly, knocking his chair back slightly. I think I should leave, he said. This was clearly a mistake. I can see that I am not welcome here. Lorraine stood as well, her heart pounding. Fletcher, please, she said. My mother is just being cautious. Please sit down. Finish your dinner. Fletcher turned to her. His eyes were cold. There was no warmth in them at all. No affection. Just calculation and irritation. Lorraine, I have made you a generous offer, he said. A life in Boston, security, a future, an apartment on Beacon Hill. But if your family cannot respect me, if they insist on treating me like some sort of scoundrel, then perhaps we are not suited for each other after all. He walked to the door. Lorraine followed him, feeling panic rising in her throat. Fletcher, wait, she pleaded. He turned and looked at her one final time. You need to make a choice, Lorraine, he said. Me or your mother. You cannot have both. If you want to marry me, you need to cut ties with this suspicious, hostile woman. You need to trust me. If you cannot do that, then we have nothing further to discuss. He opened the door and walked out into the night. Lorraine stood in the doorway, watching him disappear down the street. She felt her world collapsing around her. Edith came and stood beside her daughter. Close the door, she said gently. He is gone. It is for the best. Lorraine closed the door and leaned against it, sobbing. Her mother held her while she cried. But over the following days, something shifted in Lorraine's mind. She replayed the visit over and over. Fletcher's coldness, his evasiveness, his refusal to answer simple questions about his background, his demand that she choose between him and her mother. Her mother's words returned to her with new clarity. If he truly loves you, he will be patient. If he truly loves you, he will understand that a mother wants to protect her child. A week later, on October 23rd, Lorraine was at work when a client named Mrs. Donnelly mentioned something in passing. Did you hear about that terrible case in Philadelphia? The client said while Lorraine was setting her hair in pin curls. A man was arrested for fraud. He was pretending to be an engineer and proposing to women all over the Northeast and taking their money. It was in the newspaper yesterday. Just terrible. These poor women. Lorraine froze. Her hands stopped moving. What was his name? She asked quietly. I do not recall exactly, the client said. It was in the newspaper yesterday. Something unusual. Let me think. Cosgrove. That was it. Fletcher Cosgrove. Lorraine felt the room spin. She sat down heavily in the salon chair next to Mrs. Donnelly. Are you all right, dear? The client asked, concerned. Lorraine could not speak. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurred. That evening after work, she went to the public library and found the Philadelphia Inquirer from October 22nd. The headline on page 3 read, Defense Contractor Imposter Arrested in Marriage Fraud Scheme. The article described how Fletcher Ambrose Cosgrove, a 33-year-old man from Newark, New Jersey, had been arrested by federal agents in Philadelphia on October 20th. He had been posing as an engineer at various defense contractors across the Northeast. He would meet women on trains or at public events or through mutual acquaintances. He would court them quickly with charm and attention. He would propose marriage within weeks. He would persuade them to sell property or withdraw savings to invest in fictitious real estate opportunities or business ventures. Then, he would disappear with the money. The FBI had connected him to at least 9 cases across Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts over the past 3 years. The total amount stolen was estimated at $37,000, a staggering sum. Victims included a schoolteacher in Harrisburg who had given him $8,000, a librarian in Albany who had sold her family home, a nurse in Worcester who had withdrawn her entire life savings. All single women between the ages of 24 and 38. All described him as charming, educated, well-dressed. All said he had proposed marriage within 2 weeks of meeting them. Lorraine read the article 3 times. She felt nauseous. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the newspaper. She had been 2 weeks away from becoming the 10th victim. If her mother had not insisted on meeting him, if she had agreed to sell the house immediately, she would have lost everything. She took the newspaper home and showed it to her mother. Edith read it in silence, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she looked at Lorraine. "You see," she said quietly. "I knew. I could feel it." "How did you know?" Lorraine whispered. "I have lived 56 years, Edith replied. "I have seen men like him before. They are smooth talkers. They know exactly what to say. They prey on women who are lonely or hopeful or kind, women who want to believe in love and romance. They move quickly because they cannot afford to let their victims think clearly. They create urgency and pressure. Your father taught me to be cautious, to trust my instincts, to ask questions. And when I met Fletcher Cosgrove and asked him simple questions about his life, he became hostile. That told me everything I needed to know." Lorraine sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. "I almost gave him everything," she said. "I almost sold our house. I almost moved to Boston. I would have been ruined." "But you did not," Edith said firmly. "You listened to me. You are safe. And now other women will be safe too because he has been arrested." Lorraine looked up at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for protecting me." Edith nodded and squeezed her daughter's hand. Over the following weeks, Lorraine struggled with feelings of shame and anger and confusion. She could not believe she had been so easily deceived. She had thought herself intelligent and sensible. She had thought she could recognize a liar. But Fletcher had been so convincing, so charming, so attentive. She felt foolish. But gradually another emotion emerged beneath the shame, a desire to help others, a sense that she had been given a second chance and she needed to use it wisely. In November 1943, Lorraine traveled to Philadelphia to attend the preliminary hearing for Fletcher Cosgrove. She sat in the courtroom on a hard wooden bench and watched as the prosecutor presented evidence. Witnesses testified. Other victims were called to the stand. Lorraine listened to their stories and felt her heart break. A young widow from Scranton named Eleanor, who had given Cosgrove her late husband's life insurance payout of $6,000, believing they would use it to buy a house together. A seamstress from Trenton named Ruth, who had sold her mother's jewelry, believing Cosgrove needed the money for a business investment. Each story was heartbreaking. Each woman had believed she was loved. Each woman had been betrayed. During a recess, Lorraine approached the prosecutor, a stern man in his 50s named Harold Brennan. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "my name is Lorraine Hartley. I was almost one of his victims." Brennan looked at her with sharp interest. "Tell me your story," he said. Lorraine described everything in detail: the train journey, the courtship, the proposal, the pressure to sell her house, her mother's intervention, the visit to Pittsburgh, Fletcher's coldness when questioned. "You are very fortunate," Brennan said when she finished. "Most of the victims were not so lucky. They did not have mothers who asked hard questions. They trusted him completely. And they lost everything." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Lorraine asked. Brennan thought for a moment. "Would you be willing to testify?" he asked. "Your testimony could help establish a pattern of behavior. It would show that even when women resisted his pressure, he became hostile. That would support our case that this was deliberate fraud, not simply failed relationships." "I will testify," Lorraine said without hesitation. 3 weeks later, on December 1st, Lorraine returned to Philadelphia and took the stand. She described her interactions with Cosgrove in precise detail. She explained how he had courted her, how he had proposed after only 2 weeks, how he had pressured her to sell her house, how he had become cold and threatening when she insisted he meet her mother. The jury listened intently, taking notes. Several jurors nodded as she spoke. Fletcher Cosgrove sat at the defense table in a gray suit, staring at her with no expression on his face. His eyes were empty. Lorraine looked directly at him as she testified. She wanted him to know that she was not afraid of him, that she had survived his deception, that she would help ensure he faced justice. After Lorraine's testimony, the prosecutor called other witnesses. Bank records were introduced showing large cash withdrawals by victims followed immediately by deposits into accounts Cosgrove controlled. Letters were read aloud, letters he had written to multiple women at the same time, declaring his love and proposing marriage. The evidence was overwhelming. On December 10, 1943, the jury found Fletcher Ambrose Cosgrove guilty on 11 counts of fraud and 1 count of impersonating a federal contractor. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison. As the sentence was read, Cosgrove showed no emotion. He simply stood and was led away by federal marshals. After the verdict, Lorraine spoke with several of the other victims outside the courthouse in the cold December air. They exchanged addresses. They promised to stay in touch. They hugged each other and cried tears of relief and anger and grief. One of the women, a 30-year-old teacher named Pauline Hoffman from Harrisburg, pulled Lorraine aside. "Thank you for testifying," Pauline said. "I know it was difficult. Standing up there in front of everyone, admitting that you nearly fell for his lies. But it made a difference. The jury needed to see that he used the same tactics on all of us, that it was not our fault." "I just wanted to help," Lorraine replied. "You did more than that," Pauline said. "You gave us all hope. You showed that it is possible to fight back, that we do not have to accept being victims, that we can demand justice." Lorraine thought about those words on the train ride back to Pittsburgh that evening. You showed that it is possible to fight back. She looked out the window at the dark countryside rushing past. She thought about all the women who had been hurt by Fletcher Cosgrove. She thought about all the women who might be hurt by men like him in the future. She thought about what she could do to help. Over the following months, Lorraine corresponded regularly with the other victims. She learned their stories in greater depth. Pauline, the teacher, had lost $4,000, her entire savings. A woman named Virginia Morse from Worcester had lost $6,500. A librarian named Cecilia Grant from Albany had lost $3,200. None of them had recovered their money. The prosecutor had explained that Cosgrove had spent most of it on expensive clothes and hotel rooms and travel. The rest was tied up in legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. Lorraine decided she needed to do something concrete to help. In March 1944, she traveled to Harrisburg to visit Pauline Hoffman. They met at a diner near the train station and sat in a booth by the window. "I have an idea," Lorraine said. "What if we formed a support group? For women who have been victims of fraud. We could meet regularly, share information, help each other recover emotionally and financially. We could warn other women about the tactics these men use." Pauline looked thoughtful, stirring sugar into her coffee. "That is a good idea," she said. "But how would we find other women? Most victims are too ashamed to come forward. They blame themselves. They do not want anyone to know." "We could place notices in newspapers," Lorraine suggested. "We could contact police departments and ask them to refer victims to us. We could reach out to churches and social organizations. We could let women know that they are not alone, that there is help available." Pauline nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "I think it could work," she said. "I really do." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. They decided to call the group the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance. They would meet once a month in different cities to make it accessible to women across the region. They would provide emotional support and practical advice. They would help victims report crimes to the authorities and pursue restitution through the courts. They would create a safe space where women could tell their stories without judgment. The first meeting was held in April 1944 in a church basement in Harrisburg. 7 women attended. They sat in a circle of folding chairs and told their stories. Some cried. Some were angry. All were relieved to be in a space where they were believed and supported and not blamed for what had happened to them. Lorraine spoke about her experience. She explained how her mother had saved her from making a terrible mistake. She encouraged the other women to trust their instincts and to seek help when something felt wrong. She told them that being deceived did not make them stupid or weak. It made them human. Over the next year, the group grew steadily. By spring of 1945, there were 43 members across Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Lorraine became the unofficial leader, organizing meetings and maintaining correspondence with members and developing resources. She created a pamphlet titled Warning Signs of Romance Fraud that listed common tactics used by con artists. She distributed it to women's clubs and church groups throughout the region. In June 1945, the war in Europe ended. The country began to shift its focus from wartime production to peacetime reconstruction. Soldiers started coming home. Women who had worked in factories and offices during the war faced pressure to return to domestic roles. But Lorraine returned to her work at the beauty parlor with a renewed sense of purpose. Her passion now lay in helping other women avoid the fate she had narrowly escaped. In September 1945, Lorraine received a letter from Pauline Hoffman. Pauline had been contacted by a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer who wanted to write a story about the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance. Did Lorraine think it was a good idea to allow press coverage? Lorraine considered the question carefully for several days. Publicity could help them reach more victims who needed support. But it could also expose the members to unwanted attention and potential shame. She discussed it with several alliance members and they decided to proceed cautiously. She wrote back to Pauline suggesting they agree to the story but insist that the reporter protect the identities of the members and focus on the warning signs and prevention rather than on individual stories of victimization. The article appeared in October 1945 under the headline, Women Unite to Fight Fraud. It described the formation of the alliance and its mission. It included anonymous testimonials from members. It listed warning signs that women should watch for when meeting new romantic prospects. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, Lorraine received 37 letters from women across the country who had been victims of fraud and wanted to join the group or start chapters in their own cities. By the end of 1945, the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance had over 100 members spread across 6 states. Lorraine was overwhelmed by the responsibility, but determined to rise to the challenge. She recruited volunteers to help with correspondence and organizing. She established formal chapters in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Baltimore, and Trenton. Each chapter had a local coordinator who organized monthly meetings and provided support to members. In early 1946, Lorraine made a difficult decision. She quit her job at Marcella's beauty parlor to work full-time for the Alliance. Her mother was concerned about the financial risk, but Lorraine was confident in her choice. I have saved enough money to live on for a year, she told Edith. And if the Alliance continues to grow, I can pay myself a small salary from donations. This work is too important. I cannot do it justice while working full-time at the salon. Edith looked at her daughter with fierce pride. You have found your calling, she said. Your father would be so proud of you. Lorraine smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. I suppose I have, she replied. The Alliance continued to expand rapidly. By 1947, there were chapters in 12 cities and over 200 members. Lorraine traveled constantly, giving talks at women's clubs and church groups and community organizations. She met with police departments and district attorneys to advocate for better enforcement of fraud laws and more serious penalties for con artists. She testified before state legislatures in Pennsylvania and New York in support of bills to strengthen consumer protection. In 1948, Lorraine was invited to speak at a national conference on consumer protection in Washington, D.C. She stood before an audience of 300 people, including legislators, law enforcement officials, and consumer advocates, and told her story. She described how she had almost lost everything to Fletcher Cosgrove. She explained how the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance was helping victims rebuild their lives and warning other women about the tactics used by romance fraudsters. The speech was covered by several newspapers, including the Washington Post. Lorraine received letters from across the country, praising her work and asking for advice on starting similar organizations in other states. But not everyone was supportive. Some people criticized the alliance as unnecessary or overly dramatic. A columnist in a Pittsburgh newspaper wrote that women who fell for con men were simply foolish and deserved what they got. He argued that personal responsibility meant accepting the consequences of poor judgment. Lorraine wrote a response that was published the following week. She pointed out that fraud victims came from all walks of life and all levels of education: teachers, librarians, nurses, businesswomen, intelligent, capable women who simply wanted to believe in love. She argued that blaming victims only helped criminals by discouraging people from reporting crimes and seeking help. Her letter was reprinted in newspapers in other cities and sparked a broader conversation about victim blaming and personal responsibility. In 1949, Lorraine turned 32 years old. She had been running the alliance for 5 years. She was tired but deeply fulfilled. She had helped hundreds of women recover from fraud both financially and emotionally. She had changed laws. She had raised awareness. She had created something meaningful out of her own near disaster. But she was also lonely. She had not been in a romantic relationship since Fletcher Cosgrove. She had built walls around her heart. She told herself she was too busy for romance, but sometimes, late at night, when she sat alone in the small apartment she had rented, she felt the weight of her solitude pressing down on her. One evening in May 1949, Lorraine was working late in the small office the Alliance had rented in downtown Pittsburgh when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man in his mid-30s wearing a gray suit and holding a briefed case. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Miss Hartley," he said, "my name is Arthur Brennan. I am the nephew of Harold Brennan, the prosecutor who handled the Cosgrove case. My uncle passed away last month, and while going through his papers, I found extensive correspondence with you about the Alliance. I was very impressed by your work. I am an attorney myself, specializing in civil law, and I wondered if I might be able to help in some capacity." Lorraine invited him in. They talked for 2 hours, sitting in the cramped office surrounded by files and correspondence. Arthur explained that he practiced civil law in Pittsburgh and had experience with fraud cases and victim restitution. He offered to provide pro bono legal advice to Alliance members who were trying to recover stolen money or pursue civil suits against perpetrators. Over the following months, Arthur became a regular presence at the Alliance office. He reviewed contracts and legal documents. He helped members file lawsuits. He provided advice on navigating the complex legal system. He and Lorraine worked closely together, often late into the evening. In September 1949, Arthur asked Lorraine to dinner. She hesitated. She had promised herself she would never again trust a man so easily. She had promised herself she would never again be vulnerable. But Arthur was different. He was patient. He did not rush her. He respected her boundaries. He understood her work and supported it. They began seeing each other regularly. Arthur met Edith, who approved of him immediately after subjecting him to the same careful questioning she had given Fletcher Cosgrove. But Arthur answered every question openly and honestly. He introduced Lorraine to his family. He was transparent about his life and his intentions. "He is a good man," Edith said to her daughter after their third meeting. "Your father would have liked him very much." In June 1950, Arthur proposed. They were walking along the Allegheny River on a warm evening, watching the sun set over the city. He knelt on the grass and produced a simple gold ring. "Lorraine, I love you," he said. "I know you have been hurt. I know you are cautious. I understand why. But I want to spend my life with you. I want to support your work. I want to build a family with you. Will you marry me?" Lorraine looked at him. She thought about Fletcher Cosgrove and the damage he had done, not just to her, but to so many women. She thought about her mother's wisdom and her own journey. She thought about the hundreds of women she had helped and the life she had built from the ashes of what could have been a disaster. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." They were married in October 1950 at a small ceremony in Pittsburgh. Edith was the matron of honor. Members of the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance filled the church. It was a simple wedding, but filled with joy and hope. Lorraine and Arthur moved into a modest house in Shadyside. Lorraine continued to run the alliance. Arthur continued his law practice. They were happy. They built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. In 1952, Lorraine gave birth to a daughter. They named her Edith after Lorraine's mother. In 1954, a son was born. They named him Harold after the prosecutor who had brought Fletcher Cosgrove to justice. Lorraine scaled back her work with the Alliance to spend more time with her children, but she remained deeply involved. She trained other women to take on leadership roles. She mentored young activists. The organization continued to grow and evolve. By 1960, the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance had chapters in 30 states and over 1,500 members. It had helped thousands of women recover from fraud. It had successfully lobbied for stronger consumer protection laws in 12 states. It had become a respected national organization. Lorraine was 43 years old. She looked back on her life and marveled at how different it had become from what she had imagined that day on the train in September 1943. She had been saved by her mother's instinct. She had turned her near disaster into a mission. She had helped others. She had found genuine love. She had built a family. In 1965, Lorraine's mother Edith died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Lorraine held her hand during the final hours and thanked her for everything. For protecting her. For teaching her to be strong. For showing her that trusting your instincts could save your life. At the funeral, dozens of Alliance members attended. They told Lorraine that Edith had been an inspiration to all of them, a symbol of maternal wisdom and protection. The Alliance established the Edith Hartley Award, given annually to mothers who protected their daughters from fraud. Lorraine continued her work. In 1970, she published a book titled Trusting Your Instincts, A Guide to Recognizing and Avoiding Fraud. The book became a bestseller, selling over 50,000 copies in its first year. It was used in schools and community organizations across the country. It was translated into 3 languages. In 1973, Fletcher Cosgrove was released from federal prison after serving 30 years. He had been a model prisoner and was granted parole. 2 years later, in November 1975, Lorraine received a letter from him. It was brief and formal. He wrote that he wanted to apologize for what he had done to her and to the other women he had defrauded. He said he had spent his years in prison reflecting on his crimes, and he hoped to make amends. Lorraine read the letter twice, sitting at her kitchen table. She felt no anger, only a kind of weary sadness. She wrote back a brief response. Mr. Cosgrove, I accept your apology. I hope you have learned from your mistakes, and that you will live the rest of your life honestly. I have moved on. I suggest you do the same. She never heard from him again. She later learned that he had died in 1978 from lung cancer. She felt no satisfaction at his death, only a sense that a chapter had finally closed. In 1980, Lorraine retired from active leadership of the Alliance. She was 63 years old. She wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren and tend her garden and read the books she had never had time for. But she continued to receive letters from women across the country thanking her for her work. Some were victims of fraud who had found help through the Alliance. Others were women who had read her book and avoided scams because they recognized the warning signs. All of them credited her with helping them. Lorraine kept every letter in a wooden box in her attic. Sometimes she would take them out and read them, and remember why she had devoted her life to this work. In 1985, Arthur died of a heart attack at the age of 68. Lorraine grieved deeply, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love. The Alliance community supported her. She had built a life rich with connection and purpose. She lived another 15 years. In 2000, Lorraine Hartley died at the age of 83. Her funeral was attended by over 500 people. Current and former members of the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance, women she had helped over the decades, her children and grandchildren, community leaders and activists. Her daughter Edith gave the eulogy in a strong, clear voice. "My mother," she said, "could have been a victim. She could have lost everything to a con man in 1943, but she was saved by her own mother's wisdom. And instead of retreating in shame, she built something extraordinary. She helped thousands of women. She changed laws. She wrote a book that is still in print today. She built a family. She lived a full and meaningful life. She turned what could have been a tragedy into a triumph. That is her legacy. That is what we honor today." The Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance continues to operate. It has expanded internationally and now serves women in 17 countries. It provides legal assistance, psychological counseling, and advocacy. It has helped recover millions of dollars for fraud victims. It runs educational programs in schools, teaching young women to recognize manipulation and coercion. The headquarters is in Pittsburgh, in a building named the Lorraine Hartley Center. On the wall of the main conference room hangs a photograph of Lorraine, taken in 1970 when her book was published. She is smiling confidently. She looks strong and self-assured. Beneath the photograph is a bronze plaque that reads, "Lorraine Hartley, 1917 to 2000, founder of the Women's Fraud Recovery Alliance. She taught us that wisdom begins with trusting your instincts, that strength comes from turning pain into purpose, that one woman can change the world." Every year on October 12th, the anniversary of the day Lorraine woke on the train and sensed something was wrong with Fletcher Cosgrove, the Alliance holds a memorial event. Members gather from across the country to share stories and renew their commitment to helping women. They remember Lorraine Hartley, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a fighter, a leader, a woman who listened to the warning voice inside her and lived to help thousands of others do the same. This story is her legacy, and it continues today.